This is about empowering you with information that you can take and either bless the life or the love of your lives, regardless of where we are in our journey. How much higher we can climb up that mountain peak and broaden our horizons and change our view on life simply by using proper nutrition. And so that's going to be a theme tonight. Let's talk about proper nutrition and the impact that it has on us in regard to improving our mental well-being, whether or not we have a mental health condition or a diagnosable mental health condition or not, or whether we just want to even become better and more vibrant and healthy. And then we'll also be talking about the impact that proper nutrition has on improving the thyroid and how that can have a significant on our daily energy levels, on the metabolic rate that we have within our body as to whether or not we feel like we want to go for that run or not, right? Getting rid of that sluggishness, the things that hold us back. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And like I said, regardless of who you are, or what you do, or why you're here, this information, because we address the root causes, applies to everybody. Because there's some common factors here. Because we're not nipping at the buds of the branches, but rather hacking at the root of it, this is something that applies to everybody and is able to empower everybody by going back to nature. So to start off with, I'm going to give just a brief synopsis of what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about my own family story and how True Hope became an entity. How we ended up in the marketplace, blessing the lives of hundreds of thousands of other people, just like we have been blessed. And so we'll go into that story as to how that all came about. But before we do that, we're going to talk about the root of the issue as to why we as a society are becoming more and more unhealthy as time goes on. Disease is on the rise. And not just because they're getting better at diagnosing it. No, because people are actually significantly becoming more and more unhealthy, finding themselves in a state of dysfunction, which we call disease. And so, let's go to the root of it. I love this quote by Hippocrates: "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food." And how true does that ring? But what if we have had such a significant impact in the way that we perform agricultural functions, that we've actually changed this so that it no longer rings true if we're not growing our own food? Does that resonate for anybody here? If it doesn't fully yet, it likely will within a few minutes. You see, because we have had a significant impact on the quality of our foods, especially over the last 120, 130 years. It became well known in 1936 when they identified the nutrient levels in foods had dropped significantly, that disease was on the rise, and that we could only expect more and more dysfunction within society. And so there was actually a Senate hearing in the US solely dedicated to those issues in 1936. And you'll find the information on that in Senate Document 264. If you look it up, it's a famous document where they illustrate the impact that the depletion of minerals within the foods was having on society. And how back then they were already seeing that escalation in disease. Well, it's only gotten worse since then. You see, because within farming, they've continued to apply the model of quantity over quality, where they've stripped far more from the soils than they've given back. Do you know how many minerals you would typically find in sea salt? Who here purchases sea salt? All right, most of you. That's wonderful. Have you ever looked at one of the features that they have listed on the bag, saying how many trace minerals there is in there? Generally between about 50 and 70 trace minerals. That's what's being pulled from the soil on a regular basis. Do you know how many minerals they regularly fertilize with? Or how many elements they regularly fertilize with in standard agriculture? Generally, it's they will sometimes extend out into other areas, yeah, if there's a necessity for it, but there's the big threes: potassium, phosphorus, and nitrogen. The big three, the ones that make the plants nice and green and make them grow very quickly. And so we're finding that over the last 100 years, that there's been a mineral depletion in the soils by over 50%. And so you'd suspect that those numbers would line up with the mineral depletion found within our foods, but it doesn't. Because there's been some new developments within agriculture that has further prevented the minerals from being able to be uptaken into the plants. And that's the spraying that you see taking place there. Anne-Marie Meyer, a researcher of the UK, who's done many of the soil sample studies, showing that in the past 100 years there's been a major depletion in the mineral content by over 50%, decided to do a follow-up study with her team. And in 1997, she published the results that her and her team found when, after they analyzed 20 common fruits and vegetables, many of which we should be eating on a daily basis. They analyzed the mineral content found within those foods, and what they found is that many of those foods were deficient by over 80% in the mineral content that they'd had in 1947. So remember, 1936, things weren't looking good, and there was already a Senate hearing about it. 1947 to 1997, it just continued to get worse, to the point that many of those key nutrients that we absolutely require were deficient by over 5 times. So meaning that you'd have to eat 5 times the amount of food that they did in 1947 to get those key nutrients in the same levels. And it's only continued to get worse. Today it's said that, from the information that's available, that if you make a healthy choice and you go for a salad, you would have to eat 6.5 times the amount of that salad as what your grandparents or great-grandparents would have had to get the same nutrient content. Who here is eating 6.5 times the amount? Just him. Just him. But he needs that to keep all that muscle mass on, right? Either that, or you should really feel sorry for your grandparents or great-grandparents. Came from a starving country. So even though we've got this massive abundance of food available to us today, we're literally starving for nutrition. Even though, because of transportation methods, we have fresh produce all year round, it's not doing us any good. It's not doing us near the good that it should. And no longer is food acting as our medicine. And that is why we, as a society, are continually degrading and seeing more and more disease and premature deaths. Now, what her and her team concluded was that this major depletion in the mineral content found within the foods that didn't line up with the numbers that they found within the soil samples, that it was due to the modernization of agriculture, where they were spraying these crops with synthetic herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides. And so I'll quickly illustrate the impact that just one herbicide can have on the nutrient value within your foods. Who here has heard of glyphosate? All right, got a few of us. Who here has heard of Roundup? All right, everybody's heard of Roundup. Glyphosate's the active ingredient in Roundup. And it kills everything. It's basically farmers' best friend, because they just spray it and it just decimates everything excepting the genetically modified crops that have been produced to be resistant to the glyphosate, so that you can spray those crops and it kills all the weeds, but it doesn't kill those plants. And then you get that residue of the glyphosate from that food that you eat that's been genetically modified and been sprayed with that. And so we'll illustrate just the impact that could have on you, but before we do so, we'll talk about the impact that it has on plants. You see there's a feature listed there. It kills the roots, as if that's a good thing. But anybody that understands the rhizosome, the area surrounding the roots, and the life that's in the soil, recognizes that that's probably a bad thing. Especially given the fact that glyphosate's first patent was actually as an antibiotic, not a herbicide. And that bacteria culture is equally important within the soils as it is in our guts. Our intestines absolutely require bacteria culture to facilitate the digestion and breakdown and absorption of nutrients and food. And we understand that with prolonged antibiotic use, that we can end up with a lot of disease because we end up offsetting that gut flora, the balance there, and we're no longer digesting appropriately, and our intestines are the gateway to health. If they're not working right, nothing else is going to work right in the body, because we're not getting the things that we need. Well, the same thing's happening in the soil. It's killing off the bacteria cultures, sterilizing the soil, killing off the worm cultures that aren't only there to aerate, but actually there to help break down the minerals. Who here has ever heard of worm castings? All right. You take a specific species of worms and you put them in soil, and you can see where they've been and you can see where they're going, because there's a night and day contrast between the actual texture and look of the soil. You see, these worms have a gizzard similar to a chicken but just much smaller, and they actually are there to help micronize or break down those minerals so that they can be accessible to the plants. And with those worm castings, you can then use those within planter pots or your garden, and it acts as fertilizer. Even though it's still the same makeup, it's just what's been done to it. The process of those worms applied to the soil allowed for that soil to feed the plants. And so we end up with the die-off of those worms. And so they're no longer doing that function. And we end up with the die-off of the bacteria culture, which is necessary for the breakdown of those minerals and the converting of them into organic forms so that the plant can uptake them. The same form that we need. Because we don't absorb rock form minerals, just like plants generally don't absorb rock form minerals. It needs to be broken down and converted into an organic form. And so because of that, even though we've got 50% of the minerals available in the soil, as we did 100 years ago, they're not available to the plants because we've sterilized the soil and destroyed all life within that soil. So you don't have that conversion of the chelation minerals or the micronization taking place. Now, what impact does this have on us when we become so depleted, when our food, even when we're making healthy choices, is not providing adequate amounts of minerals? What impact would this have on us? It'd have an impact in every single area of the body, because every system, every organ, every cell requires adequate levels of these vitamins and minerals, amino acids and omega fatty acids, in order to function appropriately. And once we start to lack in any of those, the systems start to break down. And that's when we end up with disease. If we're talking about the skeletal system, we understand clearly that if you don't have adequate levels of calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus, and boron, and selenium, and vitamin K2, and vitamin D, that you're going to end up with a condition likely considered to be osteoporosis. The same thing goes with the thyroid. If we don't have adequate levels of selenium, and magnesium, and vitamin C, and vitamin B2, and B3, and the biggest one for it, iodine, you're going to end up with thyroid dysfunction. And you're not going to feel very good about life. Your energy levels are going to plummet. Well, we're going to be talking a lot about mental illness tonight. And so just to bore you briefly here, we're going to go to the neurotransmitter pathways so that you recognize the necessity of a wide array of nutrients just in two of the pathways, two of many pathways. So please don't lose sight of this and say, I only need 5 ingredients. That being for the conversion of tryptophan into 5-hydroxytryptophan, which then goes into serotonin and then melatonin, right? So now we're not only talking mood here, we're talking sleep. And we have a lot of people that come to us with depressive issues that also have sleep issues. And the reason being is because they've got a breakdown in the conversion of the tryptophan, and they're not only producing the serotonin, but they're not producing the melatonin, which is necessary upon serotonin production. And so when we zoom in here, tryptophan, an essential amino acid, found in your protein powders, found in high amounts in turkey, doesn't just magically convert into 5-hydroxytryptophan. There's an enzyme reaction that takes place that's absolutely necessary for the conversion of the tryptophan into 5-hydroxytryptophan, and then we also have another enzyme reaction that takes place to convert it from 5-hydroxytryptophan into serotonin. And when we zoom in there and take a look at the nutrients that are necessary to act as catalysts for the enzyme, we've got iron, methylfolate, vitamin C, vitamin B3, and vitamin D. If we lack any one of those, that conversion is not taking place. And we can chase it back. In fact, in the EMP that we're going to be discussing, the multivitamin mineral supplement, we don't even carry methylfolate in there. We have folic acid, which has come under fire. But when you chase it back to methylfolate, and we take a look at what's taking place within the methylation pathways, once again, the reason why most people are not adequately methylating today, just like most people aren't adequately converting tryptophan into serotonin and melatonin, is because we are lacking the nutrients necessary, and it's actually ending up in genetic mutations that prevent us from methylating appropriately.
or even if we don't have those genetic mutations, most people still are not methylating appropriately. There's another line of nutrition that it's become well aware that most people that'll take flax oil or hemp oil or consume chia seeds and they're getting the omega-3 from there, which is in the form of ALA, most people are not adequately converting that ALA into DHA, DPA, and the EPA that's absolutely necessary for brain function and cardiovascular function. And yet when we take a look at it, the main nutrients necessary for that conversion is magnesium, zinc, vitamin B3, and vitamin B6. The nutrients that many people, the vast majority of North Americans, are deficient in. Hence why people are no longer converting those omega fatty acids into their various forms that we require. And so we think that we need to eat fish to get those forms of the DHA and the EPA, when in fact our body, when it has all the nutrients available, is able to do that on its own. And so the same thing goes here with methylfolate. When you give the body what it needs, it's able to do what it needs to do, and that's heal and thrive, and the methylfolate is produced in adequate levels when your body has adequate nutrition. And we've seen this time and time again, even with people that have the genetic mutations, that over time, they no longer test positive for that genetic mutation with the methylation pathway, which is really quite significant and goes against the grain of this fad about having to have methylfolate or methylcobalamin or any of the forms of the Bs. There's 3 Bs that they will methylate. And so let the body do the methylation. Better to make it than take it, right? So when we go over to the tyrosine pathway, we see the exact same array there. Iron, methylfolate, B3, C, and D. But then when we go down past dopamine there, dopamine to norepinephrine, we now see copper in there with the vitamin C and B3. And so when you begin to chase every pathway, you'll begin to see this reoccurrence, that vitamins and minerals are the coenzyme factors absolutely necessary for the conversion of the amino acids into either hormones or neurotransmitters, and when you don't have them, those conversions don't take place, and you either have a hormone imbalance or a mental health condition, or you just don't feel as good as you should. All right, let's get out of this boring stuff.
Yes.
So the question comes down, in regard to a mental health condition, what role do antidepressants play? Many of you have either had personal experience with a friend or a family member, or maybe yourself, in using an antidepressant. And many of you are probably here for a specific reason tonight, and that's because there's an alternative. Or, I'm not going to say an alternative, a solution that addresses the root of the problem so you actually see the results that you're looking for. For the vast majority, the antidepressants aren't working. You see, with all of the science that's now coming out that has analyzed the previous science that the drug manufacturers performed on these medications, you're beginning to see something like this where questions are asked, more risks and benefits. This paper here, they analyzed about 24 studies that were completed by the drug manufacturers. And by the time you're done reading this paper, you recognize that that's not really a question of more risks and benefits in regard to SSRI medications. You actually see that it's more of a statement, because within this paper, you see the hard facts that only 11 to 30% of those who take these medications will see a small benefit over that of placebo, and yet over 75% of the people that take these medications will report adverse negative side effects. Things like increased anxiety, increased depression, the very things that it's supposed to be treating. Weight gain, insomnia, involuntary abortions, or miscarriages. And worst of all, increased suicidal ideations and homicidal ideations. Increased suicide risk within the studies by anywhere from 2 to 8 times. 2 to 8 times more likely to take your life while on one of these medications than taking placebo. That's significant. And a common thread in almost every schoolyard shooting that's taken place over the past 3 decades, that one of these medications was involved in the vast majority of them, where these young men in a state of disillusionment when they either just got onto the medication or were withdrawing from the medication, did things that they otherwise would have never done, thinking that somehow it was appropriate. At True Hope, we've seen this over and over and over. In fact, we had to develop a support program to help people come off these medications safely and effectively. And as such, we've helped over 100,000 people in coming off medications safely and effectively, recognizing how addictive they can be, recognizing the significant impact that they have on the individual, that they have on family members, that they have on communities as a whole. But more so than just that, we saw the effects that mental illness, if left unchecked, would also have on the individuals and family members and the entire community as a whole. But more so than just observing this and having an answer and coming out to the marketplace with a solution, the reason why we're here today is because we lived it. Because we saw the effects that those medications would have on our family. We saw the effects that the mental illness, if left untreated, would have on our family. We lived those nightmares. It all started in 1953 when my mother was born to a middle-class Italian family, a beautiful family. But behind closed doors, there was a lot of abuse, a lot of volatility, a lot of anger. And the reason being is because there was a lot of mental illness. The question came up to me earlier on about thyroid conditions, whether or not they're hereditary. And there appears to be a genetic component in regard to thyroid conditions as well as mental health conditions. It appears that when we provide a less than ideal environment within our bodies, that we are doomed to have the gene manifestation that our parents or great-grandparents or our parents or great-grandparents had when they were in a state that was less than ideal, when they were not getting enough nutrition. And so, within my family, there is a significant component of mental illness throughout just about my entire family. You can see it in cousins and second cousins. It seemed to come down from a number of generations up. And so, my grandfather had these volatile behaviors. My understanding is that he was a beautiful man, but 5 years before I was born, he ended up taking his life. So I never had the opportunity to meet him. He ended up giving in. And so my mother, growing up in this situation, decided to move out early. And even though she came out of the situation, she developed an incredible love for life. She met a young man, my father, and at the age of 17 got married to my 18-year-old father. And one thing led to another, and I'm not sure if they ever quite figured out what was going on. But soon enough, there was 9 of us running around. Just a display of my mother's love. An incredible person. Now, when she wasn't tending to us at home and taking care of things around there, as I'm sure you'd all speculate, there would be a lot on her plate. She was reaching out in the community. And at one time, she was working within the foster care system, and she was working with this young teenager who came from an extremely broken home and had since left that situation because of the abuse and all that was taking place. And she ended up coming home one time and convincing my father that they should adopt her, and they did, making for a total of 10 children. That is the type of woman that she was. Unfortunately, she inherited the bipolar disorder that her father had. The ups and the downs and the volatility and the mood swings. And after 10 years of going through a roller coaster of low lows, where some days she wouldn't get out of bed because of how depressed she was, to high highs, where some days she wouldn't go to bed until 4 or 5 in the morning because she was on top of the world and had so much to accomplish and so many projects on the go. After 10 years of this, she finally decided to go to the doctor and receive help. And so she did so in January of 1994. She received a diagnosis of bipolar disorder with rapid cycling, received a prescription for Prozac, one of those SSRI medications that I previously mentioned, and began to take it. 2 weeks after beginning to take it, she ended up taking her own life, leaving behind 9 children who were all devastated and who had all inherited her disorder in one way or another. And so there was 2 of my siblings that had it extremely bad. Joseph was in his mid-teens, the brother just older than me. I was on the far left there. He was the one that I had my arm around there. I'll just go back real quickly there just so you see. Because I always get the question after, who are you? So Joseph, there, sitting down in the blue shirt with the big bow tie, about 3 times as big as my bow tie. Yes, I was envious. I probably stole that bow tie. But he had it extremely bad. He was medicated, he was homicidal, suicidal, he was stockpiling weapons, he was on weapons charges with the RCMP, and he was basically the next schoolyard shooting waiting to happen. Autumn was in her early 20s. 3-year-old son, married. When she wasn't in the psych ward, she had to be on 24-hour supervision because of the risk that she was to herself and her 3-year-old son. She would obsess at times about how to kill herself and her 3-year-old son, thinking that was appropriate. That's where she was. She was on a cocktail of 5 medications, heavy medications, that at best left her sedated, but she was not functional. At times she was confined to a wheelchair because of the MS symptoms that began to develop from these medications. So here's my father, left in this extreme predicament, seeing where his father-in-law had gone, seeing the path that his wife of 22 years, who he was madly in love with, had gone, and watched her diminish. And now watching 2 of his children, who made the rest of us, though we were not good, made the rest of us look like angels because of how severe they were. Watching them go down the exact same path. And so, he ended up exhausting all the resources available to him. He was working with a family doctor with Joseph at the time, and by early 1995, he was remarried and decided that he needed to get better help for Joe, so he took my stepmother and Joseph up to the Foothills Hospital here in Calgary to work with the head psychiatrist. And he sat down with her and began to tell her about how bad things were at home, and she just stopped and said, "Mr. Stephan, spare me the details. I work with thousands of clients a year. It's not going to do you any good to dwell on this." I said, "Well, surely there has to be a better answer. With all the millions of dollars that have gone into mental health research, there has to be a better answer, because Joseph has no hope for living a real life, of having lasting relationships, of being able to pursue a career, of being able to do what he wants to do, pursue his dreams." And she just said, "Mr. Stephan, I concur with the family doctor. You have the best of medications available to you. This is as good as it's going to get." He wasn't willing to take that for an answer. She finally just got annoyed with him after going back and forth and around in circles. And she said, "Mr. Stephan, please escort your wife and son out the door." And he did. And as soon as he did, she laid into him, "Mr. Stephan, you need a reality check." She walked to her bookshelf, pulled off the DSM-4, opened it up to bipolar disorder, and read that it was a recurrent disorder. "Mr. Stephan, do you know what that means?" I said, "No, I don't know what that means." It means that these disorders do not go away. And often in time, they get worse. This is as good as it's going to get, and you need to face the reality that someday you may, in fact, have to plan more funerals. He says, like a shotgun going off in his ears, and on that 2-hour drive home, he was probably far more depressed than Joseph had ever been. But it was in that moment that he began to realize that the medications offered no hope. Not for our family. They weren't working for my sister or my brother, and they weren't working for my mother, just like they don't work for the vast majority of people. And so he began to look elsewhere. She did him a favor by being completely blunt and honest, because that's what turned him to looking in a different direction. He began to talk to people in the community, ask them what they knew about mental illness. He heard a lot of stories, never once heard a story of somebody getting better though. Heard a lot of stories about adult children still to carry out or to hold on to a job or to keep it together with their former spouse or their girlfriend that they were looking at getting married to. Heard a lot of stories, but never once did he hear a story of recovery. But he tried a lot of things that people had to recommend, and nothing delivered. Good things like magnetic therapy and Tahitian noni juice and all sorts of good things like that were coming in and out. He was willing to try anything, and nothing was working. And so, finally by mid-1995, he came to the realization there was no known answer to mental illness. But he thought to himself, as he believed in God, he thought, if there truly is a God, God knows the answer, and God wouldn't want his children to suffer like this. And so he began to spend a lot of time in prayer, and meditation, and fasting, seeking for some kind of divine intervention that would bring restoration to his family before it completely fell apart. And nothing miraculous happened overnight, but bits and pieces of information continued to come into his life as he did this over the next few months that prepared him for what he was going to hear in November of 1995. When as a property manager of 26 large buildings, he's walking down the hallway one day with a colleague, of one of the big buildings, and they're talking about replacing carpets. And he's overcome with the impression, I need to tell my colleague about what's going on at home. And so he did. He broke down and basically just summed it up that if things do not change, we have no choice but to have Joe admitted to the psych ward, because everybody's fearing for their lives. His colleague had something interesting to say. He said, you know, Tony, I've got a large family like yours. Surprisingly, it was actually bigger. He says, but they're all well. They're fine. My wife, she's fine. They're healthy. I've never dealt with mental illness, so I can't relate to you on that level. He says, I spent over 20 years in the animal feed industry formulating feed for hogs across Western Canada and the Western United States. And he says, we saw something commonplace in the hog pens called ear and tail biting syndrome, where the hogs would get irritable with each other, bite chunks of their ears and tails off each other, and if you did pen them away from each other, they'd actually end up killing each other. Sound familiar? I think we diagnosed that as hyper-irritability, with some rage, some anxiety. We'd give them a healthy dose of medications and watch them become sedated. But yet they discovered something within agriculture. They discovered that if you put the proper nutrition into their feed, it would completely eradicate this disorder. And it would make the pigs healthier. Disorder gone, healthier pigs have more babies. It's beneficial for the farmers to do that. And so there was a financial motive, an economic benefit to having these pigs healthy, because the farmers were able to get more productivity out of them. Which in the example of pigs is babies. And so, when my father heard this, he says like a light bulb flipping on. Even though he had tried so many different things before and nothing had delivered, in this moment he knew it was the answer. They went down to a health food store, picked up a bunch of different vitamin mineral products with his colleague having a background in biology, and they put Joseph on it, and it failed. My father knew it was the answer, so they continued on with it, and they failed again. And it wasn't until January 18th of 1996 that they came across 4 different products that worked, consisting of a colloidal mineral supplement, a calcium, magnesium, phosphorus supplement, a multivitamin, and grapeseed extract. They put Joseph on it. They'd already tried similar products to this, but these were produced in a different way. That's why they had to source them out of the States, that the body could actually assimilate the ingredients that he was putting in his mouth. Because you aren't what you eat, you are what you absorb. And so, like I said before, we do not absorb rock form minerals. So I can go and grind up a rock, and I can do an assay on it and say, hey, yeah, I've got this much zinc, and this much phosphorus, and this much nickel, and this much calcium in there, and let's put it in a tablet, and here you go, right? Put it on the label. Not doing anybody any good. You may feel good about taking it, logically, because you're being proactive, but it's not doing anything for your body. In fact, it can actually do more harm than it does good for your body, because it's taxing on the system. And so, these 4 different products that were produced in a way that your body could actually assimilate them and put the ingredients to use, were put to use, and within 5 days, Joseph said it's like a fog lifted, and he could now see what was right and wrong. 5 days, he could now judge his behavior. He didn't recognize the issues that he was creating with his behaviors because he was kind of living in his own world. Within 30 days, he would have no longer received a diagnosis for bipolar disorder. He wasn't 100% well, but he was now operating in what we call the normal range. Normal good days, normal bad days. But as time went on, as the months went on, as the years went on, he got better and better and better and more stable. His behaviors changed, his coping skills changed, his perspective on life changed, his whole life changed. The next thing was to get Autumn onto these 4 different products. Now, she wasn't willing. She was working with a psychiatrist out of Edmonton, 5 hours north of us, who said, if you rock the boat and play around with your medications, you'll die. So when my father phoned her up really excited, she wouldn't entertain it. And so, fortunately, about a month after Joe got well, she had to come stay with us because there was nobody to watch over her and her 3-year-old son for a week while her husband was working a night shift at a factory. So she came to stay with us. Her husband drove her the 5 hours south, dropped her off, went back to work, and a day and a half into her stay, she had a severe panic attack, went suicidal, and my father said, look, I'm not babysitting you. We're not doing this. This worked for Joe, it's going to work for you. And so, he ended up putting her on the 4 different products. And her husband when he found out, was absolutely livid. And for good reason. Of all people. Having the solution. His father-in-law, and yet here they had been going for years and years to these doctor visits, working with specialists, and yet now his father-in-law is messing around with that. And it's probably just a real good thing that there was a 5-hour drive between them, because it probably would have been a lot more than words had they been any closer. But when he came at the end of those 5 days and saw his wife becoming a whole new person, transforming, and she wasn't even close to being well, not even close, but the hallucinations that she had had were completely gone. She was now taking care of her hygiene. She was now able to conversate logically and rationally. Her life was already beginning to change to the point that her husband recognized it after 5 days and decided, you know what, let's continue on with this. And within 45 days, they had her off of all of her medications, because we came to recognize how addictive those medications can be. And so we do not recommend people go off medications cold turkey. There's a reason why we developed this program for people where their doctors aren't able or willing to work with them in helping them come off medications. Now, many doctors, unfortunately, don't have a whole lot of training on how to take people off medications, and they're not fully disclosed the facts that these medications are, in many cases, a lot more addictive than the street drugs that you go and get from the guy on the corner.
Most doctors actually don't even know about basic nutrition because it's not their training.
That too. Exactly. And it's unfortunate that the doctors are not being properly educated in some of these matters. These matters that matter so much to their clients. They're unfortunately just being told a lot of things from the pharmaceutical industry, getting a lot of their information from pharmaceutical reps, being told things like, before it was well known that these medications were addictive, that they're not addictive, they just have what we call a discontinuation syndrome that's mild and transient. Tell that to some of the toughest situations that we've worked with, where it's taken us upwards of a year to get some of these people off their medications. For most people, it's only a couple of months, sometimes less. But sometimes they're that addictive that it takes people over a year to come off these medications. And the doctors are not being adequately informed, and they're not to blame. So they continue on with it. 45 days later, she thinks she's 100% well. She's not. But she's now grocery shopping. She's taking care of herself and her 3-year-old son. She no longer requires supervision. She's getting to do the things that we would consider mundane and would not want to do. She's getting to do. She's taking on projects around the house. She's doing a lot more with her life. And as time went on, same with Joseph, she got better and better and better and more stable, and her view on life changed. Now that should have been the end of the story. My father's family was receiving the restoration he had so desperately prayed and pleaded for. His prayers had been answered. He had a great job being that property manager over 26 large buildings in southern Alberta and acting as the engineer, because that's what he is by trade, is an engineer. And so everything was good. Everything was changing at home. Everybody was beginning to view Joseph through a new light. And all the relationships were changing. But growing up in a community of 3,500 people, and just about everybody knowing who Joseph was and the kind of trouble that he was, and seeing the transformation, not only in his behavior, but in his countenance, the way that he carried himself, the energy that I had about him, the fact that he would actually smile, that he had more of a glow about him rather than that dark energy. People began to ask my father questions, saying, what have you done with him? He's a completely different person. My father would tell them. And then the next round of questions would come, do you think that would work for my wife with depression or anxiety, or my son with ADHD? And my father would say, I don't know. It worked for bipolar disorder, at this point thinking that there may in fact be a difference between these diagnoses, that they do require different treatments, and that they're completely separate from each other. But he said, you know what, try it out and see. And people began to try it for all sorts of mental health conditions, and it was working. And it was incredible. The life transformations that were taking place. And my father looked at this and said, wow, this is an incredible breakthrough. Think of all the families that could be blessed like my family's been blessed. We need to get this into the hands of doctors. And so in his naivety, thinking that the doctors would readily accept it just because it works, he attempted to do that. Now this, remember though, this is back in 1996. We are a lot more educated today. And so we laugh about it today. But yet I think most of us would have found ourselves in that same position back in 1996, thinking that the medical system, the pharmaceutical industry, had us in their best interests, and that it had nothing to do with money, but that they were operating out of benevolence. Today, we know a little bit different, don't we? We know that unfortunately, the love of money has overridden the love of humanity. Well, my father attempted to do this, and so he approached Dr. Brian Kolb, a world-renowned neuroscientist out of Lethbridge, actually, who discovered that brain cell regeneration can take place, ironically, using 22 vitamins and minerals. So you know how it's said that when you have brain damage, the damage is done? He disproved that. So my father went and approached him and said, hey, look, this is what we're finding. Do you think you can study this? And he said, no, I don't do those kinds of studies, but Dr. Bonnie Kaplan does, out of the University of Calgary. So my father attempted to approach her, and she just blew him off and said, you know, I've dealt with all the flakes in the 80s regarding nutrition, I just don't have the time to waste. And so my father went back to Dr. Brian Kolb and said, hey, look, is there anything we can do? He says, here, I got the symptom evaluation forms they typically use in these studies. I tell you what, I'll supply them to you. You give them to the people I'll be using the 4 different products. I'm going to postmark them directly back to me, and we'll see what comes of it. And so my father began to supply them to the people that were taking the 4 different products. And then they would mail them in directly to Brian Kolb, so that there was no tampering taking place. And Brian Kolb got back in touch with my father in short order and said, hey, I think we're onto something here. We got some significant numbers. I'm going to forward them on to Dr. Bonnie Kaplan. She took a look at it and said, this is a complete snake oil, or we are onto a potential medical breakthrough. This is either fraud, or this is, in fact, the answer that we've been looking for all along. She sat down with my father and became very excited when she interviewed my father and my older sister Autumn, and discovered that she wasn't an individual that was in need of intensive psychiatric care any longer. And so she began to study the 4 different products. But then something happened, even though she saw the same effects halfway throughout the study as what we saw. People began to relapse. Their symptoms began to return. So they'd gone up, and now they're coming back down. And what was discovered when the UFC decided to analyze the 4 different products was that the colloidal mineral supplement that we were using was a variable in itself. That depending upon the batch, that the levels of minerals in there varied. So it was producing variable results. The study was shut down, and we were looking for a replacement. And a lot of things came in and out of our house, trial and error again. But nothing seemed to really deliver. And so finally my father decided, you know what, we need to produce our own all-in-one supplement that's going to produce the results that we're looking for, produce the results that others are looking for. And so he ended up doing a lot of research, him and his colleague. They spent a lot of time doing that in the university libraries. My dad spent a lot of time in fasting and prayer again, recognizing that, look, who am I to produce a product that's actually going to generate results when we've already tried all these other ones and almost none of them are producing the results that we're looking for? Who am I? So seeking for divine inspiration again on how to move forward. And then teaming up with a great nutraceutical company out of the US that was already producing 2 out of the 4 products that we were using, so that those minerals would actually be bioavailable. And what came out of it was Empower Plus, a very whole multivitamin consisting of 36 ingredients, 16 minerals within the proper balance, calcium, magnesium, phosphorus being in the proper balance, so that we don't offset that balance in the body and disrupt it or create disease. And the copper and zinc as well being in the proper balance, so that we don't create anxiety or psychosis issues by offsetting that balance in the body. So very, very crucial that the minerals are within their proper balance, but then they have to be in the proper form so your body can actually put them to use. Because it doesn't matter how well you balance it, if it's not absorbing, it's not doing anything. And so 16 minerals in the proper balance and proper form that the body can actually assimilate them, 14 vitamins, 3 amino acids, and 3 antioxidants. So a very whole multivitamin is all it was. Just supplying a lot of the nutrients that we were supposed to be getting out of our food, but we're no longer getting out of our food in adequate amounts. And so it was put to the test, and it was changing people's lives, and people were excited about the results they were seeing. But what we came to recognize is, even though it was creating that life transformation we were looking for, is that the vast majority of people didn't appreciate the fact that they had to take up to 48 capsules per day if they had an acute mental health crisis, and that they had to maintain on 24 capsules per day, as seen there. And so in 2000, we changed the chelation technology. So the organic molecule that's being attached to the mineral that assists in it pulling through the intestinal wall and hitting into the bloodstream and then going where it needs to go from there, hopefully crossing the blood-brain barrier to actually create some substantial effects there. In 2000, we changed that chelation technology and got down to 32 capsules per day. Same formula, just a different organic molecule. But that's still too many. So in 2001, we began to micronize, just like those worms that we would use for worm castings that should be in the soil. We began to micronize like they were micronizing within the soil in ideal conditions. And just by doing that, we got down to 18 capsules per day. Substantial difference. Still too many though. So we developed our own chelation technology in 2005, put it to the test, got down to 15 capsules per day, and then we further improved on that chelation technology. And now today, using the same formula, you can take 1/4 the amount and get the same results that you would have 20 years ago. All because we mimicked what Mother Nature was doing, because Mother Nature knows best. Well, the product was developed, it was brought back to Dr. Bonnie Kaplan. She was excited to study it. She began to study it and began to see results very, very quickly. Got excited about those results and actually ended up publishing the preliminary results. And back in October of 2000, there was no such thing as social media. So no, it didn't go viral, but it would have back then, had there been the means to do so. But it went to the next best thing. It ended up on national news, and I'll actually show you that news clip here once the speaker shares it.
CTV News. Can a nutritional supplement help people suffering with a troubling mental disorder? CTV's Ava Sparrow has an exclusive report you won't want to miss. Watch CTV News tonight at 11.
In medical news tonight, there is new reason for optimism for sufferers of bipolar disorder, a condition that causes manic depression and a condition that affects hundreds of thousands of Canadians. According to findings of a small study presented today to the Canadian Psychiatric Association, a combination of vitamins and minerals may alleviate the disorder's debilitating symptoms. CTV's medical specialist David Stephan reports.
Bipolar illness ran through Tony Stephan's family. His wife Debbie committed suicide. His son and daughter were also ill and on drugs that didn't work.
She had already been taking medication for over 4.5 years, and she was going to suicide. It wasn't helping. My son was on 900 milligrams of lithium per day and was absolutely out of control.
Then he learned of minerals and vitamins given to pigs with a nervous disorder. In desperation, he gave a variation of the supplements to his son.
Within 30 days, he no longer experienced any of the symptoms of bipolar affective disorder.
Both his children, he says, are still on the supplements and are well some 4 years later. Now, doctors at the University of Calgary say they have intriguing early results from a group of 10 bipolar patients on the same supplements. Most had less depression, fewer manic episodes, and improved mental well-being.
The decrease in their symptoms is of a magnitude that is very impressive. Any medication that ever had this effect would catch a lot of people's attention.
And most have cut their standard drug use by 2/3.
This is an entirely different approach to the standard medical therapies that we use now.
But Steve Morton, who was part of the Calgary study, said the nutrients helped put his life in order after the bipolar illness left him suicidal and in hospital.
This has brought me to recognize a new me, and has allowed me to become, a new person.
In fact, the Alberta government is investing more than $500,000 to fund more rigorous studies of these supplements.
What year is that?
That was October of 2000. The Alberta government funded $544,000 into it to fund a double-blind, placebo-controlled trial so that they could validate whether or not these supplements were actually doing what many people were saying they were doing. And so there was a real cost benefit because they were going to save in medical care costs substantially, because these are far less expensive than psychiatric medications, and yet they were more effective. So they were actually not only just treating people and leaving them in a state where, well, okay, they'll be on disability or on AISH, but rather return to work and become more contributing members of society. So there's a tax revenue benefit as well. So the Alberta government knew what they were doing there and was willing to actually help Albertans out in pushing this forward. But yet, the very next day after that aired, just like Dr. Bonnie Kaplan said, any medication that ever had this effect would catch a lot of people's attention, alluding to the fact that her study was showing it was over 3 times more effective than your standard antidepressants. It did catch a lot of people's attention, and we made some new friends that stuck with us for a very long time. When the very next day, Health Canada came in and notified my father that he was in contravention of Section 3132 of the Food and Drugs Act, needed a drug identification number in order to help somebody with bipolar disorder, even though it was a multivitamin, and they shut down those studies that the Alberta government was funding. It is ridiculous. Makes no sense unless somebody has an agenda. My father attempted to work with them for a very long time and finally came to the realization that they had an agenda when at some point they just said, no, Mr. Stephan, if you want to continue doing what you're doing, perhaps you just want to move south of the border. As if Canadians were not deserving of a Canadian discovery that could largely impact their lives in a very positive way. And so my father at this point said, oh, okay, well, you know what? I don't need the permission of some bureaucrat in Ottawa to tell me whether or not I can bless the lives of other people like I've been blessed. So he continued on doing what he's doing and began to ignore them, began to ignore their cease and desist orders. And finally, Health Canada got really irate because, no, people listen to them, right? They have to. They came in at gunpoint with an RCMP SWAT team and raided our head office in small town Raymond, Alberta. We were the talk of the town. We're still the talk of the town. That was the most exciting thing that ever happened there, I think. It seemed to be nothing more than a fear tactic. Because 2 days later, we were up and we're operating as if nothing had happened because nothing that was listed on the search warrant had been found. And we weren't willing to go away, neither were the 3,000 Canadians that were relying on these products willing to go away, even though Health Canada had shut off the border and prevented access to them. Health Canada finally came in and they charged us, and we ended up in the courts for 3 weeks with them, where it was proven that our products did what we said they were doing. Because even though the studies were shut down in Canada, to try to suppress the flow of information, there was researchers in the US that found out about it. They began to study it, and their results replicated exactly what Dr. Bonnie Kaplan had seen. Over 3 times more effective than your standard antidepressants. In fact, we had Dr. Charles Popper, who is an extreme skeptic. It's a whole other story, and we don't have time for that tonight, but through a set of circumstances, ended up trying it out on a young boy whose parents weren't willing to do medications, and saw such tremendous results that it eventually led to him converting his own private practice. Even though he was out of Harvard University, he converted his whole private practice over to the use of the EMP. And what he came and testified, now he's a renowned psychopharmacologist and psychiatrist out of Harvard, who's actually responsible for bringing lithium into North America as a treatment for child and adolescent bipolar. And so here's an individual who's constantly engaged in experimenting and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And his drug of choice was actually lithium, which ironically is not a drug. It's a mineral that's administered at toxic levels. So it becomes a drug, but it's a mineral. And that was his drug of choice because it was more effective than all of the other synthetic molecules that they were putting together under the brand or under the umbrella of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, yes, SSRI medications, or your other older antidepressants. And so what he did is he ended up doing some studies on it, and he came and testified and said that it was more effective than any medication or combination of medications that he had ever employed in his use before. Why? Because it's what the body needed all along. The body was never deficient in Effexor. It wasn't deficient in Prozac. It didn't even know what those elements are. That's why they have such disastrous effects for many people. It's because they're completely foreign agents that the body doesn't really know how to deal with, and ends up putting them into storage so that they stop causing so much havoc. And then years and years after people have stopped taking it, suddenly they go for a long hike, and they access fat stores that they never accessed before. And all of a sudden they've got meds pushing onto their system that the body, in a state of self-preservation, had put off to the side. And so what came out of this 3-week court case after this vast amount of evidence came forward was that our products did what we claimed and what, at that point, tens of thousands of other people had claimed them to do. Medications, that it was safe and effective, and in many instances a necessity for many of the people that were looking to come off the medications, because what happened is if you took adequate amounts of this and you still maintained on your medications, you become over-medicated, because as your brain chemistry began to normalize, as your body came into a state of homeostasis where everything was functioning, that medication had no place there. It never did have a place, but now it really didn't have a place. And so people become over-medicated and start to see the negative side effects of those medications. And so they'd have to come off those medications or reduce the amount of this. They'd have to make a choice in order to maintain some level of well-being. And so what came out of it was a victory. But more so than just a victory, a mandate. The judge came down and said, based on what Health Canada has demonstrated by restricting access to these products, that you have no choice but to continue to supply your products and programs to those who take them, or who need them, and that if you don't, you may find yourself in court again, but this time under Section 217 of the Criminal Code of Canada for engaging in criminal negligence by creating bodily harm. And so really the only reason I'm here today is I have no choice. The judge said so. Even though this was an extremely traumatic event for so many people, for the 3,000 Canadians who were fearing the idea that they may never have access to these again, even though it was traumatic to us, and we ended up going from helping people come off medications using our phone support system to more of a counseling service for people that were in a state of confusion, being distraught, wondering why their government would do this. Even though we came out of all this and the studies have been shut down, this court victory set a precedent that protected many of the natural health products that were therapeutic within the industry, because Health Canada wasn't just going after us, they were going after anybody that was competing with the pharmaceutical bottom line in a substantial way. And so it ended up protecting these other companies from them, which was a beautiful thing. And then the studies began to happen again. It was a beautiful cry for freedom. And as a result, today there's now 34 medical journal publications on this formula alone, making it the most studied micronutrient in history, being quite significant, but that is not the most significant part about it. Those 34 medical journal publications are just being derived from studies that are merely validating what tens and tens of thousands of people have already seen in their own lives. That's it. That's the most significant part. Is that a huge amount of people have had their lives completely transformed and have done so drug-free, the way that nature intended. And that's the beautiful thing. People with anxiety, people with ADHD, ADD, Asperger's, autism, addictions. Turns out you don't feel the need to self-medicate when you feel great about life. When your tryptophan pathway is working appropriately and you're producing adequate levels of dopamine, it turns out that you don't feel the need to go and do some drugs or abuse alcohol. And so it's been studied on that. It's been studied on, obviously, bipolar is where it all began, major depressive disorders, traumatic brain injuries, which we'll get to in a moment, what Terry's talking about in regard to concussions and the impact that that has on individuals when it's left untreated. And then the thing that applies to all of us, stress. We've all had our hands full of stress, really. There was a study done out of Christchurch, New Zealand, right after the February 2011 earthquake. And it was done to see how people fared when they literally had their lives falling apart around them. And what it found is that those who were taking this formulation over top of a different, they were comparing it to another multivitamin, they had far less stress, far less depression. They were able to see life differently, and rather than getting caught in the rut of life and just staying down there and just being, complainant about their life circumstances, they had a better motivation and drive to move forward. Isn't that incredible? How just nutrition, proper nutrition, could change our perspective on life, get us to see things through a positive light, a proactive light. those who ended up taking it were 5 times more likely to continue taking it at the end of the study than those who were taking Bayer's Baroka, their multivitamin, which Bayer came out and said it's the most effective treatment for stress. Even though it's not one of their pharmaceutical medications, the multivitamin, it's their most effective treatment for stress that they've ever delivered. And yet, people were 5 times more likely to take this in the study because of those incredible life benefits that it had supplied. Well, who here is without their own metaphorical earthquakes? Who here is without their traumas? We all get shooken up from time to time, just like they did in Christchurch, New Zealand. Sometimes, yeah, our houses aren't literally falling apart, though it begins to look that way when we find ourselves in traumatic situations and we begin to neglect everything around the house. We all have our own earthquakes in our lives. And many of you are aware of my own earthquake that devastated me and my family. You heard about it in the news. When in 2012, we lost our second son. Traumatically, unexpectedly, not the way the news put it. In fact, Denzel Washington summed it up really quite nicely, and it resonated deeply after going through all this. He said, when being questioned by the media on some fake news, he said, if you don't read the newspaper, you're uninformed. If you read the newspaper, you're misinformed. Kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of thing, right? And that's the way it was portrayed. Our story was misrepresented. And after having the autopsy report falsified to change the narrative, to create criminal liability on us, and having what we've now discovered, it appears to be over 200 pages of medical files withheld that we never received during the court case that all showed the autopsy report was falsified, and having it make it look like the ambulance issue where my son ended up in an ambulance that was ill-equipped that they knew about. Alberta Health Services had made aware of that for over a year previous, where he went over 8 minutes without any oxygen after having that falsified autopsy report, trying to show that, no, that didn't make any difference. And not even making mention of it, neither any of the other medical files, hoping that we'd never find out that our son went over 8 minutes without oxygen. After going through that, we were absolutely devastated. We were devastated first and foremost with the worst thing that could happen to a parent, the loss of a child. And then all it was insult to injury, salt on a wound, when we ended up getting charged a year later. And yet what I've come to realize is that nutrition plays a substantial role. I used to believe it before, but now I know it. I've lived it now. It plays a substantial role in keeping our heads up and being able to maintain a positive outlook, even though you don't know whether or not you're going to be with your children in a month from now. If you're going to be ripped apart, as the Crown's seeking for 3 to 4.5 years jail time. It helps us see through a different lens and see life for what it is, regardless of our circumstances, that life is beautiful and that we don't need to become a product of our circumstances. I found it absolutely necessary in maintaining that positivity so I could have a spiritual connection throughout all this, so that I could have meaningful connections with those around me, be able to show gratitude and love and express that, rather than getting caught up in my own self, going into that cocoon that many of us find ourselves in when we're under high amounts of anxiety and stress. It's amazing what nutrition does. It's amazing what our body allows us to do and how it becomes a beautiful tool for us to use in this life, being spiritual beings, rather than a hindrance when we empower it to do so. Moving on, talking about the beautiful effects that nutrition can have, not only in mental health, but in brain health. I mean, mental health is synonymous with brain health, but brain health on the physical level, going back to brain injury, and talking about people who've had strokes and concussions and other traumatic brain injuries. There was a study done by Dr. Brian Kolb after he ended up putting his brother-in-law, who had a major anxiety disorder, on our supplements and recognizing the benefits. He decided to do a follow-up study to see if brain cell regeneration would take place. So what they did is they took 120 2 to 4 day old rats And they induce strokes in their brains by either removing a large portion of the frontal lobe of the brain or by putting holes in the parietal lobes, impairing their cognitive function so that they can no longer orient themselves. And that's why you have maze tests and all that type of stuff, the Morris water test, to see if they can reorient themselves over time. And what they found is after 90 days, that these baby rats had a full recovery in their cognitive function. In fact, the rats that had the brain injuries and were put onto the EMP formulation were actually outperforming cognitively the rats that were the control rats that never had a brain injury that were on the 22 vitamins and minerals. They were more normal than normal after 90 days. Now, these are baby rats. They're able to heal quicker than what an adult human would be able to, but it was still significant. But what they found furthermore is when they took a look at the brains, is that these are the control rats. There was no injury induced. There's a coloration difference merely for identification purposes, but that's what the brain should look like. Here's one where a large portion of the frontal lobe is removed. Here's one that was on Empower Plus, or the EMP. They'd never seen that before. They had seen before small amounts of regrowth, but never had they ever seen a full regrowth. And the same thing with the parietal lobes. You can see where those holes have been punched. All you can see is scar tissue where those holes had once been in the parietal lobes of those brains. And that's what they found without fail, over and over and over. And then they took a look at the neurons. An indicator of a healthy, highly functioning neuron is how complexly branched and how long the dendrites are for sending and receiving messages. The more of them there is and the longer they are, the better the connections are and the more connections there are. What they found out without fail was like a Charlie Brown Christmas tree versus a regular Christmas tree. The neurons had much more complexly branched and longer dendrites when they were on the nutrients here. Not the 22 vitamins and minerals, which were still having a great impact. It was published in Discover magazine, a full 8-page article, and our phones began to ring off the hook. Now, not only from people that had mental health conditions, but people that had traumatic brain injuries or strokes. And we got to see the impact that it was having in their lives, in restoring their quality of life, in bringing them to a whole new level. And it was absolutely beautiful. Now, this article didn't just focus on that, on the things that I showed you there, but it also talked about the origins of the EMP, going back to Joseph, people like Joseph and Autumn, who had no hope, who 22 years ago had no hope of living a real meaningful life. And today, he lives a life that he should have never had. He met a young woman and followed in the footsteps of my parents. More efficiently, though. You can imagine the stress that one set of twins is, right? Can you imagine the stress that 2 sets of twins? And no, that is not a side effect of EMP that we're aware of yet. Yes, EMP does make us much more efficient in many ways, but we have yet to validate whether or not it actually makes you more efficient in procreation other than being fertile. What's that?
Twins are generally genetic anyway.
Exactly. But even having 2 sets of twins and the stress that would bring, they're able to see life for what it is and to enjoy it and to enjoy the beauty around them. Autumn. Autumn is more bright and healthy than she was 22 years ago. She was given the advice to have an operation to prevent her from becoming pregnant because of the risk that those 5 medications would have on her and her fetus. She's glad she never took that advice. Because after she got well, she ended up having 3 beautiful daughters with the same husband that she attempted to kill on more than one occasion when she was delusional. They now live down in Idaho. They live the lives that they should have never had. And she went on to write a best-selling book, A Promise of Hope. Used to be available in chapters in Costco. And it's an absolutely beautiful book. And there's a promo on tonight if you buy any of the 2 products that the book is being supplied free of charge. But I'm not sure if Priya and Navi are supplying a box of Kleenex or not. But if they're not, you might want to go get one because you'll laugh, you'll cry. It's one of those books that once you pick it up, you don't want to put it down. It's a beautiful, beautiful story of healing. Going back to the product though. Our goal has always been result-oriented. To change lives like our lives have been changed. To bless lives in the same way that we've been blessed. And merely to share what we've been given. And we've discovered over time that the EMP formulation is an incredible foundational formulation consisting of those 36 ingredients, many of that we're not getting in adequate amounts in our food, and that's why it's having such a tremendous effect. But what was discouraging, even though it was working for the vast majority of people, is that there was a small percentage of the population that was not having those effects from it. And so we were left looking for reasons as to why. How could we get these people to experience those life changes that we've experienced? And what we came to realize is that over time, that there was various other things that had to be incorporated for certain individuals to have that complete turnaround in their life. And so one of those things was in regard to thyroid health. You see, the EMP has an effect on the thyroid because yes, there's some iodine in there, and yes, there's other companion nutrients in there that optimize the iodine pathway. And so if somebody had a low-lying thyroid issue, many times it would actually help correct it. But yet if somebody came to us with a severe thyroid condition that ended up eliminating their vitality for life, their drive, their energy, affecting negatively their metabolism, their hormones, the EMP wasn't enough. And so what we did, after recognizing that there was a hole in the marketplace, we ended up bringing out a product rather than just recommending, because many times we just say, hey, go down to the health food store, pick up this product. But we recognized that there was concerns around certain iodine supplementation, especially if the thyroid wasn't functioning properly, to convert that iodine into the proper form. We recognized that we had to fill the hole in the marketplace and ensure, oh sorry, I'm going to jump through this real quick. We had to ensure that there was a safe, extremely effective and yet gentle form of iodine that comes in the form of being nascent iodine. Now, the significance of nascent iodine is that it goes through a special electromagnetic process that disassociates the sodium and the iodine from each other. So it's now in its atomic form. The iodine is all by itself. Now, why is that significant? Because that's what the thyroid has to do to all the other forms of iodine that you ingest. It has to go through that conversion process. And if your thyroid isn't working well, you can end up with thyroid congestion where it's backlogged with iodine, basically. And that's where concerns can arise from iodine supplementation. So this is already pre-converted. And so it's able to go to work like that. First thing I do in the morning is I wake up, hopefully, in the morning. I go down, I get a shot glass, and no, I don't put whiskey in there. I put an ounce of water, and I put 4 drops of that iodine. And I swish it around my mouth, and it absorbs rapidly, and it absorbs near the thyroid. And within literally 5 to 10 minutes, I'm now feeling awake, present, I'm here, I've got energy, but it's not like a coffee buzz or something like that. It's not a stimulant. It's just getting the production of the T3, T4 hormones, which increases your metabolic rate within the body. And now I'm alive, I'm well, I'm here, and I'm ready for the day. So that's why we brought out nascent iodine, was to get rid of any of those concerns around other iodine supplementation. And yes, it's more expensive, but many people are taking far less and seeing much more. And so the reason why it works is because it's bioavailable. And it's already in the right form. It's pre-converted. And so it works very, very quickly, more effectively, and yet more gently, which is kind of like an oxymoron or a paradox in itself. Companion nutrients, the reason why it works so well with the EMP especially, rather than just using it on its own it's great. But when you use it alongside the EMP, you get the selenium and the magnesium, and the vitamins C, B2, and B3 that are necessary for the optimization of the iodine pathway so that the iodine can fully do its job. Now, many people are very, very hesitant about iodine supplementation, especially if they have Hashimoto's, that autoimmune condition. And they can't take iodine without it creating an issue, but yet you need iodine. And so it's really quite a conundrum that they're in. Many researchers are finding that when you take adequate levels of these companion nutrients, that the Hashimoto's goes away, and that you can take the iodine and no longer have those concerns and actually get your thyroid functioning the way it's supposed to. And so it works very, very well. Yes?
What if you're already taking thyroid hormone replacement?
Okay, if you're taking thyroid hormone replacement or any other thyroid medication, you just start slow. You start slow on the iodine, and you just continue to get checked, your levels checked with the doctor, and what you're going to find is that you're going to start going through withdrawals on the or you're going to reductions on the medication, where you no longer need as much. And so there are some people that have been able to completely come off. My sister's one of them, my younger sister, where she had PCOS, and she was on desiccated thyroid, and she no longer needs any thyroid medication. Her levels test normal, and the infertility that she had from the PCOS is now gone, and she's now pregnant and living the life that she should have never had, having major hormone disruption in the past. And so the iodine has been key for that, but also the inositol, which we will talk about shortly. You're welcome. And then sea salt. Making sure you get adequate amounts of the sea salt is necessary as well for the use of iodine. So what people can come to expect from it is balanced hormones and metabolism. The reason why balanced hormones is every single hormone has a hormone receptor site or an iodine receptor site that's necessary for the iodine to occupy. But if you don't have adequate levels of iodine, and yet you're being inundated with fluoride and bromide and chloride, those elements will occupy that same receptor site, and then they build up in the glandular areas of the body, and it becomes problematic. And you become a lot more prone to cysts or cancers in those areas from the accumulation of these toxins in the body. And so with that, you will also detox from fluoride, bromide, and chloride as the iodine knocks out those other elements off that receptor site, gets the hormone working properly, and now you're left with this fluoride or bromide or chloride floating around your bloodstream. So if you do the iodine, do it slow. The detox is inevitable. Just make it gentle, as if you never even noticed it was there, and then slowly work your way up over a few weeks. Otherwise, you may end up in almost a full body rash like I was in after 5 days of doing 10 drops per day and going through a major detox, even though I've been eating and drinking very clean for the past decade and a bit prior. And so these elements like fluoride, bromide, chloride do not detox like heavy metals. They will stay in the system until the iodine pushes it out. It also helps detox you from heavy metals like lead and mercury. But so the hormones have that receptor site. And then your T3, T4 hormones are absolutely necessary, or it's necessary that you have iodine for them, because the 3 and the 4 in those hormones stands for the amount of atoms of iodine in there. And so if you don't have adequate levels of iodine, you don't have T3 or T4. And so the other thing is with metabolism is that the T3 is absolutely necessary for regulating the metabolic rate within each cell of the body. And so if you don't have adequate levels of that hormone, your metabolism is going to be off. And that's why a lot of people that have the thyroid conditions also have weight gain that takes place, and they just have low energy. Increased IQ, there's been studies between areas that are sufficient and areas that are deficient, showing an IQ difference of up to 13.5 points. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, yeah, it's basically double. For me, without those 13 points, I'm useless. So, absolutely has a profound effect in the brain functioning optimally. Detoxification, as we'd already mentioned, and the most important thing, increased vitality for life. That's what we're looking for. That's the end goal, is getting people to feel awesome about life and to see it for what it is. And just pursuing their dreams, having just an unconquerable motivation. So that's where the nascent iodine comes in. But we developed other products as well to address other needs. And I'm going to quickly go over them real quick. The BMD, a bone health product. What we found is when people added other minerals to this formulation, even though they were taking more, they were seeing less. They weren't getting as many results. And one of the main culprits was calcium. And Dr. Levy is now actually promoting, through a presentation called Death by Calcium, he's promoting, or he's notifying people of the dangerous effects that calcium can have. Well, we recognized that 2 decades ago when we were formulating our own product. And they recognized that in agriculture, that if you gave the wrong form of calcium that wasn't in the proper balance with magnesium and phosphorus, you could actually create osteoporosis, which is extremely costly in agriculture. And so, Yeah, it builds up in certain areas and everything. It creates major issues. Calcium can be very, very destructive. And so what we found is when people were taking that, they weren't seeing the effects of the EMP. So what we did is we developed our own calcium that was going through the same 4-day process where it's being micronized and being chelated, so it's in an organic form that your body can actually assimilate, and it's in the same balance as this. So consisting of that calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus, selenium and boron, and then the copper and the zinc in the proper balance as well, and then vitamin K2 and vitamin C and vitamin D. So 10 ingredients working synergistically in the proper balance, and what we found is when people take it alongside this, it doesn't affect or negatively impact the results of the EMP in regard to mental health, but it actually accelerates them. Because you're getting more of those key nutrients that not only affect the bone health, but also your mental health. Yes?
My bus is going to be here in a minute.
Yeah.
What kind of calcium is in it?
It's diabasic calcium phosphorus that we put through a 4-day process where it's broken down with different cultures and it's micronized.
Can I have another question?
Yeah.
The EMP, has it been shown to help with dementia or Alzheimer's or memory loss?
Anecdotally, yes. No studies formally, no. We've had a lot of people that have used it for things like Parkinson's and dementia and Alzheimer's, and it seems to have stopped the progression and brought them back a certain degree, but it's all individual based. Some people have great responses, some people don't have as good responses, and so there was a study that looked like it was going to take off in Utah on Alzheimer's. I'm not sure where that's gone, whether it's underway or if it came up against some hurdles or not, but the reason for that study, why they were looking at it, was because of the fact that people were seeing some good results. Yes. Okay.
This helped with my depression. I love it.
Oh, thank you so much. She just said how it helped with her depression and anxiety and how she was able to get off her pills.
Yes,
So,
very good.
thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. So the reason why it works, you can see a recurring theme here, just like EMP. Right combination of ingredients, ideal mineral balance, and then it goes through that 4-day process to actually allow for our bodies to uptake it, which is absolutely important because the other two we can do all day won't do any good unless we can make it so that it actually gets to where it needs to be in the body. The next part that we came out with was free aminos. So remember the amino acids we were looking at in the neurotransmitter pathways? Amino acids are the foundation for hormones and neurotransmitters, and they get converted into various ingredients or they get converted through various ways to make up those hormones or neurotransmitters to perform certain functions as messenger molecules that come in contact with the cells and tell the cells what to do. So that's what this is. But the reason why we came out with it was not to help with the formation of neurotransmitters and hormones, though it does that extremely well. It's because of the profound effect that it had in helping people come off medications and eliminate a lot of the withdrawal effects. So that's why we initially brought it out, but then what we recognized is that it was an incredible formulation on its own, medications aside. And the reason why is because we took the same approach to producing it as we did with the EMP. And so, the reason why it works is it's the right combination of ingredients. And how we determined that is we took a look at what human breast milk was providing in amino acids, which are really just the bricks of protein. Proteins are amino acids that are chained together, that are grouped together, right? So when you eat protein, you know the emphasis on protein, we need lots of protein. What you're doing is you're not eating protein for protein, you're eating protein for the breakdown into the separate amino acids that will then go into the bloodstream. So protein has to go through this, it's like eating a brick wall, and it's the bricks that you want. So these are the bricks all by themselves, so you bypass the having to break the wall into its separate bricks before it can go to the bloodstream. And so the right combination of ingredients, we took a look at human breast milk, and what we found is there was 22 of the amino acids in there that were within a specific balance, so that the body didn't have to do as much converting. Because you can take, it's debatable whether it's 8, 9, or 10 essential amino acids, you can take those and the body will produce all of the other amino acids from that, but it takes conversion, which is fine. You can convert very effectively if you have all of the other nutrients, but human breast milk is supplying it that way so that it's extremely bioavailable and goes to work very quickly for babies. And that's why babies are able to heal a lot quicker, their immune systems are much better than adults, and why they're able to grow so rapidly is because they have this great source of nutrition, regardless, when it comes to amino acids, the balance, regardless of the diet, nationality, or where the mothers are living. It has the same profile of amino acids coming out. Though maybe not in adequate levels, but it's the same profile it appeared to be. So we ended up producing it based off that balance, which is ideal for human nutrition. We added L-theanine for relaxation, so making for 23 free-form amino acids. And then we added 7 vitamins to further help the assimilation of those amino acids when they get into the bloodstream. So right combination of ingredients, the ideal amino acid balance based off of human breast milk, not derived from human breast milk, based off of human breast milk. I think people get a little bit grossed out. Though we drink cow's milk. Okay. And then free form for maximum absorption. Free form being that they're not in a protein form, they're not combined to each other, so in digestion you don't need to release enzymes to cut them apart. They're already there and they're ready for rapid absorption and then rapid healing. So I'll take them right after a great workout because that way I'm getting the amino acids for recovery for the muscle tissue right away. I'll take them to help me with sleep. A lot of people are doing that. And they just help facilitate faster healing and better well-being mentally and physically, especially when in combination with the EMP. They work synergistically. The reason why we don't have these in here is people aren't as deficient in amino acids as they are in minerals, and so we're addressing the greatest deficiency with the EMP, and that's why it's generating the greatest results. But the amino acids are equally as important, and so when you add those to it, you're now putting that icing on the cake. Olive leaf extract we brought out for intestinal health. We found that some people weren't responding to this, and the reason being is they had a major fungal overgrowth, candida overgrowth. You've all heard of candida. We all have it. It's part of our gut flora, but if we have a lot of antibiotic use and then overconsumption of sugar, we end up with an overgrowth of the candida, which affects our overall well-being, can bring on depression and all that type of stuff. It actually makes us malnourished because the candida loves nutrition. It thrives off nutrition. So what we found is when people would have a major candida overgrowth, they take the EMP, they wouldn't see the effects. Oh, no, what the heck's going on? Turns out the candida was robbing them of the EMP. It had first dibs. And so they were really developing a great candida overgrowth. So we ended up starting to, we brought olive leaf in, which is basically like, if you thought of your gut as a garden, it's like it goes in and it weeds the garden, gets rid of all of the things that you don't want in there, and then you bring in a great probiotic that they would have available here at Replenish, and that replants the garden with the good stuff that you want. And so the olive leaf is anti-candida or antifungal, antiviral, antibacterial. It's really great that way. It's antiparasitic. It's also a phenomenal antioxidant, over 4 times more antioxidant value than vitamin C. And so it's anti-aging that way and whatnot. It's great. It's being used for cardiovascular health and helping to regulate blood pressure into the normal range, whether it be high or low. And it's also helping with insulin resistance with diabetics. So it's a really, really great herb. But the reason why we use it is to help get rid of a lot of the overgrowth in the gut so that we can get the gut working properly, because the gut is the gateway to health. If it's not working right, nothing else in your body is going to work right. The reason why it works, the reason why we brought it out, there was already olive leaves available. We were recommending various olive leaves. Some worked, some didn't. So we wanted to ensure that we could recommend a form that we knew was going to produce the results that we were looking for. And so we ended up coming out with our own version that we knew was going through the proper process while it was being manufactured, that all of the phytonutrients were still intact so that it could produce the results that we were looking for. So it's an effective form. Inositol. So going back to hormone health here, as I briefly discussed before with my sister, the inositol is phenomenal for that. What they're finding in regard to diabetes and PCOS is that they're finding that the inositol is far more effective than metformin, which is awesome. And the reason why it's awesome is because it's natural, and yet it's more effective than the standard medication that they would prescribe for those issues. The reason why we use it is not for hormone health, it's actually for brain health, it's for anxiety. Somebody comes to us, they have major anxiety disorder, and let's say they get an EMP, which helps correct the anxiety over time and helps reduce the amount of anxiety or panic attacks that they may have. But let's say somebody got triggered. Let's say they had a bad day at work, or traffic was horrific, and so anxiety levels go up. Where the inositol comes in is that rather than somebody running to the cupboard to grab an Ativan, to get back onto the medication temporarily, and then us having to get them back off of it, and then deal with the residual side effects of that, it was a beautiful alternative where they could then go and get the inositol powder and use that instead, and have the same effects without the side effects. Kind of like hitting the reset button, brings a beautiful calm. Now what inositol is, used to be classified as vitamin B8 until it was discovered that the kidneys will produce about 1 gram per day of it, which means that it's no longer a vitamin, so they pulled it out of the vitamin classification. But it's in the same family as xylitol, maltitol, erythritol, all of these alternative sweeteners. And what it provides for us, and it's absolutely necessary in the body, that's why our body produces it, what it provides for us is the structural basis for the secondary messenger molecule within the cells. Now that sounds really technical, but what it means is it empowers the cells that when they come in contact with the first messenger molecules, which are hormones and neurotransmitters, which are there to tell cells to react in a certain way. So let's take insulin, for example. Insulin is released into the bloodstream, and it's there to tell cells, hey, look, we got an increased level of glucose here, do something with it. But if the cells don't have that messenger molecule on the inside, they can't adequately respond. So the first messenger molecule goes up to the cell, and the cell doesn't know what to do. It's like you got a big castle wall, and somebody saying, hey, look, there's an army coming, you're under attack, and there's nobody to hear the message on their side. Everybody's just partying on the inside, and then suddenly you're in a catastrophe. Same thing with diabetes type 2, or type 2 diabetes, where your cells are not adequately responding to that insulin. Well, the same thing goes with your cells responding to the neurotransmitters like serotonin or dopamine. And that's why when people take it, there's a profound effect in it helping with mood balance, but also a major reduction in panic or anxiety in that moment. And so it creates this beautiful, beautiful effect. And so we use it on an as-per-needed basis. And the reason why we produced it, once again, we were recommending it. People were seeing great effects from some and no effects from another. And yet, we decided to bring out a form that we knew would work. So, effective form is why it works. But that's it. Not to get myopic on the products, because it was never meant to be about products. The products are merely tools. Tools to empower us to change our view on life, to change our outlook and to rise up closer to our potential, and to become who we're meant to be and to experience the beauty around us regardless of our circumstances. And it's just so incredible to see how when we empower our bodies with the proper nutrition, how we literally become different people. Happier, kinder, more loving, more willing to share. And I'll be talking more about that actually at the Calgary Health Show in regard to ADHD and the studies that have taken place there with young children and how it's transformed their lives. And so I'll be talking about that on Sunday afternoon. It's just amazing how this helps bless the lives of others. And I encourage all of you to put it to the test for yourselves, for your loved ones, to see how it changes you and your relationships. Because life truly is vibrant. Thank you. Questions? Yes?
Have you guys seen many people being able to be on the iodine and get off the hormones?
Yes. So the question is, have we seen many people that have gotten on the iodine and been able to come off of thyroid medications, the hormone replacement? The answer is yes. It's variant though. Some people are able to reduce down a bit, some are substantial, and some are completely off, which is great, especially if they're able to come completely off and allow the body to just regulate everything appropriately. And so my main recommendation would be to not just use iodine supplementation on its own, as that's only one of many things. The EMP and the iodine teamed up is phenomenal, and then when we're talking about overall hormone health, you could also see substantial benefit from the use of the inositol or the free aminos as well there in working synergistically as a whole. But the iodine and the EMP alone, though, will produce significant results in regard to thyroid health.
And how much would you recommend for somebody to be on MRs?
Yeah. So how much would be recommended? Obviously, that's individual based as well, as we all have different nutrient requirements. But typically, what we would recommend is starting off at the 2 per day because of that detoxification effect, and then slowly working it up after that point to a point that you feel great. And everybody's going to be different. For some people, that's going to be 10 drops per day. For some people, it's going to be a little bit higher initially until they get saturated with it, and then they can bring it down to a maintenance dose. But just play around with it because there is no putting it in a box and saying this is what works for every single person, because every single person is different. Yeah, so just work up slowly and just see how you feel. Let your well-being be the indicator as to whether it's working or not.
So I've been on them since I was like 18, so 31 years ago.
Okay.
So have you seen people be on thyroid for a long time?
Yes, what we would expect though is a longer transition period, because if you're taking hormone replacement, then your body hasn't had to produce those hormones like it once did, and so it becomes, in a sense, a bit lazy, right? So it'll take a fair bit longer, but just stick with it and just see how it goes. And like I said, continue to get checked with the doctor in regard to your hormone levels, and just see if it's necessary that you do a reduction, or it's also your right, if you feel comfortable with it, to do slight reductions on your own. And with thyroid medication, it's generally not really a big issue. You're welcome. Yes?
How does taking the inositol compare to taking GABA for anxiety?
Okay, for anxiety, GABA, well, it works on a different level. GABA is a neurotransmitter that's produced in the brain or in the gut as well. And so it's working at a slightly different level because the inositol isn't a neurotransmitter, nor is it producing neurotransmitters. It's allowing the cells to respond to the neurotransmitters. What we find in regard to GABA or SAMe or 5-HTP is that you don't want to utilize those alongside these products. And the reason being is because this is addressing the root of it. See, if we go and take 5-HTP, what we're saying is, okay, well, our body's not converting tryptophan to 5-HTP, so rather than identifying what it is that we can do to get the tryptophan to convert to 5-HTP, let's just supplement it with 5-HTP. So we still haven't fixed the problem. The same thing goes with GABA supplementation. If we're not producing adequate levels of GABA, let's find out why that is. And what it all comes down to is it's because we don't have adequate levels of the precursors, which would be your amino acids, and the coenzyme factors, which are your vitamins and minerals that facilitate the conversion of those amino acids into things like GABA. So here's what we find. If somebody takes 5-HTP or SAMe or GABA and they're taking this, they'll actually start to see anxiety, even though many people are taking it to assist with anxiety. And the reason being is because they're now overdoing it. They're over-regulating rather than just giving the body what it needs and allowing it to produce the proper amounts of GABA. So there's a bit of a difference there. Inositol, GABA are different approaches. One's working within the cell, one's working as a cell messenger. But the one has not a major, but has an issue when you have adequate levels of supplementation. It can actually create the anxiety, whereas the inositol doesn't. Yeah. You're welcome. Yes?
If you're on 5-HTP, do you stop taking that right away then? Or do you have to
I would reduce if I was taking 5-HTP and I was getting on this. You can expect within 2 to 3 weeks. For many, it's actually much shorter, but 2 to 3 weeks, you're going to see significant results from this at about the 6 capsules per day mark is what I'd recommend. So if you're on 5-HTP, I would reduce it over the period of about a week as your body starts to now produce the 5-HTP on its own. Yeah. Standard dose is 4 to 6 per day. So that's what we call a maintenance dose. If somebody has an acute situation, if somebody came up to me and said, hey, I'm like, feel like a bomb's gonna go off, I have so much anxiety, right? Or I'm extremely depressed or suicidal, then what we'd recommend is doubling that dose. So 8 to 12 per day is what we'd recommend in that situation until symptoms are gone, and then we bring it down.
Bring it down to somewhere.
To a maintenance dose of 4 to 6 per day.
Okay, so 2 wouldn't be enough.
No, there are some people, and it appears to be generally those that are much more unhealthy, that seem to be just starving for nutrition, that will take 2 per day, and they think they're on top of the world, right? And they basically are in that sense, but it's not like their level of well-being is like above somebody else. It's just that they were starving so much that 2 a day made a significant difference for them, though they're nowhere near where they need to be, and they still need to get up to a higher dose eventually to get up to that level where they're actually thriving. But they think they're thriving because it's all relative. They were literally living in the dumps before physically, and now they've come a little bit out of the dumps, but they're just, you know.
And then it's the iron or the iodine that you said to start with a couple drops.
Yes, iodine, just start with a couple drops. The detox is inevitable. Do it slow.
From the iodine.
From the iodine, yeah. The EMP also has a detoxification effect as well. And so many people get on it and they'll feel great, and then they might go through a bit of a dip just for a very short period of time. And the reason being is it acts as an oral chelator. Not only is that chelation facilitating the nutrients going to where they need to go in the body, but it's also pulling out toxins, heavy metals, and medications that have been stored up, pulling them out. So just be aware of that it's going to detox you as well. And so if you can start off slower, awesome. If you're in an acute situation or a loved one is that needs more right now, then don't worry about the detox, just go forward with it. The free aminos, if somebody's concerned about detox, coming off medications, helps with the detox because it'll help bind up to a lot of these toxins and pull them out of the system faster than normal.
How long are people finding that they can take the other free meals when they're getting off medications?
If it's for the application of coming off medications, how long do they need to be on the free aminos? While they're coming off medications. Yeah. So once they're off, then we no longer recommend it for that application. If somebody, let's say they're off the medications for 3 or 4 months, sorry, in puberty again. All the hormone stuff, right? I'm a new man. So if somebody is, let's say they come off the medication 3 or 4 months ago, and they go for the hike, or they go play tennis, or whatever it may be, and they're accessing those fat stores that had the medications. In that moment, what we would recommend is if you have this on hand, take it, because you're gonna all of a sudden feel like you just took a major hit of medication. You're gonna be agitated, you're gonna feel horrific, you might even go suicidal because of the medication. Because remember, now you're feeling great about life, everything's working well, and all of a sudden it's like you just took a couple of these meds, and so you're over the top. So the free aminos is great to take in that moment. If you don't have it, whey protein isolate. Being a very bioavailable form of protein, is able to get enough of the amino acids into the bloodstream in short order that it actually eliminates a lot of those effects. And so I'd recommend having one of those on hand if somebody was on psychiatric medications and they came off, just on an as per needed basis in case they ended up in that situation where they exercised too much and they had a med push. Isolate. Yeah.
So my son has ADHD, he takes the EMP, but he also takes whey protein isolate because he trains in cross-country running and then out of the track.
Yep.
So he's taking that whey protein isolate every day, pretty much. Would he be better off taking the free aminos?
Yes and no. See, the free aminos, think of it as just pre-digested protein. So you don't lose as much through digestion. You respond quicker to it. But when you're looking at the cost of it, it's more cost effective to do whey protein isolate for the amount of amino acids that you get out of it. So if I'm working out, I actually do both. I don't do whey protein isolate anymore, but I'll do a form of protein. But what I will do immediately following the workout is I'll do 2 to 3 capsules of the free aminos so that I get those amino acids right now. And then I take the protein, which is now going to digest over the period of 2 to 3 hours, and continually feed, like an extended release, feed the bloodstream with amino acids so that I have that muscle reparation continuing to take place. So I'm getting that muscle reparation happening right now, and then over the next 2 to 3 hours as that protein is digesting. So they actually work together, but in that application, if you only did one or the other, my recommendation would be just do the whey protein isolate. But if you're wanting to step it up a notch, then you combine. You're welcome.
So, coming off of SSRIs slowly, how much would you?
If you're coming off the medication slowly, one, I would recommend phoning the support system that we have, as they're the experts in the field. I know just enough to get myself into trouble with it. But I would probably say if you're coming off on your own and you want to utilize, then I would just say probably do 6 per day. And if you do a withdrawal or reduction in the medication and you start to feel agitated and that type of stuff, then I would up it in that moment, and see, like, you should see almost immediate effects within a half hour to an hour. So you should be able to play with it and figure out what you need. But if you want to utilize the support system, that is available. It's $35 per month. It entitles you to 5 days a week phone support. And then in case if there's ever an emergency, there is the emergency line over the weekend as well that you can get in touch with somebody. So it's a great value. It's $35 is basically to subsidize a portion of the cost, so that we don't go completely bankrupt on it. But yeah, so that is available to you as well if you ever get in a situation that you feel that they could be of use. You're welcome.
So if you go onto this, you still take a B-complex, or you don't need to take out the calcium and vitamin D and any of those?
I take additional vitamin D because the vitamin D levels in here are not significantly high. So I take additional D. I take additional Bs from time to time. I take additional C throughout different seasons of the year. And I take vitamin K2. The vitamins, there's nothing wrong with taking additional there. But the calcium I would not. And that's why we developed the BMD, our bone mineral formulation, specifically for that reason. Because, like I said, even if somebody's taking those other minerals and now they're getting more, they're taking this and the other minerals, they're seeing less results because there's a conflict going on in regard to the form and the balance. And so that's why it was necessary that we produced our own bone formulation to combat that issue, because a lot of people are coming in and saying, but my doctor says I need 1,200 milligrams of calcium per day, and so there's not quite enough in here, so I need to go and take more. But what is it that you're looking for? Because you're not getting the health benefits that you're looking for until you get rid of that calcium. So we decided to produce our own that would help get people to where they need to be and not create a conflict. So additional vitamins is good. Omega fatty acids. The only reason why we don't have a great omega fatty acid product here is because there's already great omega fatty acid products on the marketplace. And like I said, we're not in the business of just throwing a product out unless it's going to provide a substantial offering to people. So we're not in the market of competing with others. We're in the market of providing tools that are otherwise not available to those that are looking for these life changes. So we would recommend, though, taking a great omega fatty acid product, because when you have the vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and omega fatty acids, you've now got your foundation of health right there in regard to nutrient supplementation. And then the probiotics assist in getting all that in there. So the probiotics and digestive enzymes for getting the gateway to open up more so that you can get more nutrition. Yes.
If you're taking probiotics, you have to take a prebiotic as well?
You probably should to feed it. You probably should to feed it. Yeah, you want to do whatever you can to get your gut flora healthier. Yeah. You should probably be eating more foods that are naturally prebiotics. All right, any other questions?
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope that has been of value to you.